Hey everyone. So I'm gonna let Sam take the lead today to help us get through our work on this document, if that's okay with you, Sam.
Yeah, I'm thinking no. I think I'm going to take a break and go out and get a drink. Alternatively, who are we missing, if anyone here?
We're missing several people. We're missing Mark, Ian, who is joining, but he's going to be a few minutes late. Shane and Brian, and then Bill, but I don't believe Bill is joining today. I think it's just me and Ian. Ian and I.
Okay. Well, we got Mark Yeager now, so was that the Mark you were referring to, Ginger?
Oh yeah, I see. I hadn't scrolled all the way over on my window, so now I see both Mark and Ian. So
Okay. So then, who do we need to wait for then?
Well, Brian may let me know that he won't be able to make it today.
Okay.
And I haven't heard from Shane, but I don't think he's been at the last couple check-ins. So I'm not sure if we have to wait for anyone. But I did want to make sure Ken and Ian have audio and can hear us okay.
Yeah, I can. I just got on.
Yeah, Ken can hear you.
Thanks, both of you. All right, so let's jump in for some preliminary framing. This isn't anything set in stone. It is my general reaction to this. So, and I will also apologize if I am repeating myself from what I may have said earlier about this. I've frankly been in so many similar subcommittees that are in a state that I could be blending them in my mind. However, I did just skim the key pages, the first 60 pages, if you will, which is a draft as it existed based on the comments received last night, but as I understand it, not those received today. So, thinking ahead to next week's work group meeting, in a perfect world, which I recognize this is not, the work group would be presented with the key findings and key recommendations from all the subcommittees, and a process yet to be clarified of engagement onto those particular topics, similar to what we've done in the past. I know what's in front of me, these 60 pages, is what I'll call the body of the subcommittee report. And it is not the body of the work group report that is sort of the executive summary of these full 60 pages. With that in mind, I was looking at an organizational structure that we could use that puts these 60 pages in an order such that the charge and members, which are on pages 12 through 16, then the definitions, and then the findings and recommendations are all at the beginning of your report, such that we can copy and paste those first pages that contain all that stuff and put it into the body of the work group report. Because, and this would include pages 42 through 52, which include the sort of the main projections based on what we know now or think we know now, and then introduces the other additional factors. And if we use that order and put all the definitions in one place, because there are definitions that are sprinkled throughout this document. For instance, there's some in the beginning, but then on page 29, there's like almost a whole page of definitions that are floating around. And then the pictures, which are great, and they appear on basically 17 through 24, but they're all sort of in one place. I know that's just a holding place for them. Is that then we go in and take those pages, the pictures rather, on 17 through 24 and sprinkle them throughout the report. I think this document starts to take place. So what are your general thoughts about that? I'm not suggesting we do this on the call, but the full subcommittee report, the first, I'm making this up, 10 pages are, here is your charge. Here are your members. Here are the key definitions. Here are the key findings. Here are the key recommendations. Then jump to pages 42 to 52, plug those in, and that becomes the basis of your contribution to the work group report. And then the rest of the material that follows really is backup to justify your findings and recommendations, your site life projections, all those other things. But the way it's sequenced now, I don't think we get to the punchline until page 42. And Dan, can you pull up that page? Can you pull up this document? So, as I understand it, and this, Paul, I have to ask you a question. You know, when I say this is like one of the punchlines here, it's this chart. You also said, I thought, that there's another chart that is a key takeaway from this. Did I get that right? And if so, what was that other chart that needs to be front and center?
Sam, are you asking me?
Yeah.
So the chart that I'm looking at right now is figure 11, the historical end of life projections. Is that the one you're referring to?
That's the one that's in there now. I thought there were two that you thought were equally important.
Yeah, let's see, Daniel, I'm not sure what came after that. Sam, I don't know off the top of my head, you know, which other one you're referring to right
Paul,
now.
it might be the intake chart that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's way back though.
Yeah.
And therein lies the problem. It's way back.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that if we do the order that I did and jump into this page 42, we need the intake chart and we need this chart. And it seems to me we need one more up front so we don't bury the lead, which is the chart that says, or the table, I don't remember what the hell it is. Here's where this stuff comes from. Not this. This is going to put it in the subcommittee report, but this is not going to do it for purposes of people understanding the punchlines. So Daniel, go ahead.
It's like the different counties that contribute material to
Yes.
Butte.
I think it's figure 6.
Yeah.
I think it's figure 6. It seems to me those three figures are headlines. What is the intake? Where does it come from? And what is this initial end of life thing? that then tees up the reader to understand, okay, now we're going to explain why these three charts are key. You need to understand these three charts to be, and know that, because we'll cross-link and whatever, all the data and the support and the tables and all the background information is in the subcommittee's big report, but it gets in the way in the first 100 pages. So does that make sense to you? How are we going to grab the reader's attention? 3 ways. Here's what's happened by way of intake, because that was a key issue. Where's this stuff coming from? Key issue. And the first shot at the end of life calculation. Those things need to be front and center, either right before or right after the findings, for the people to understand what's going on. And then, Dan, if you scroll down a little bit, I want to find an example. Like right here, this table two, I totally get why it's there and it's helpful, but it's only helpful if someone wants to dive deeper and question you as to why you came up with whatever the hell's going on with cell 2D. And if you guys have a consensus on this, I don't think anyone will have the need to do so, because they rely upon this balanced subcommittee's view that that's the right information. But putting it in here then makes it harder to, at this point, makes it harder to find what is the next major point I really need to focus on. So Chuck, are you applauding me or asking a question? And either is fine. You're on mute, buddy.
I just wanted to ask one question, okay? I just closed my eyes and opened my eyes on this and I read down. The only problem I see is it says future on 5E and cell 6. And future means to me way out or infinity, where I thought they were already active in cell 5. So shouldn't that reflect 2023? And then cell 2026 in 4 years from now instead of future. It gives it some relativity there, if you will.
Okay, so Chuck, that's a great comment, and I'm going to suggest for all of us is when we're at this important but micro level, which will come after we get the general organization agreed to, that you make a note of that and then bring it up when we are into, do we like table 2? Are we good to go with table 2? But I want to keep us at the macro organizational level. All I am saying about table 2 is it's great, subject to Chuck's friendly amendments here, but does it need to go in, I'll call it, first 15 pages, which is what most members of the Public Planning Commission and the Commission BOC are going to have time to read and assimilate? And I'll suggest, no, it does not add to that. It should be there, but not buried. Reactions, Paul, you had your hand up or unmuted.
So, we organized the document this way for a reason, to try to make it readable and have a flow. I understand your desire to prioritize things. Are you into kind of almost an executive summary within our report? Is that assessment? So yeah. In that case, I would just suggest that we might want to replicate things into this section rather than extract them and remove them from where they are. Does that sound okay, or is that going to be too confusing?
Until I see it, it is hard to know. Here, I'm just telling you my intuition. In your mind, the executive summary, which really is the body of the work group report, those 15 or 20 pages, is that executive summary. Do you see a need to have table 2, just as an example, in that executive summary?
No, of course not.
Great. Then we're on the same page. I don't think we're saying anything different, because the way I'm suggesting we reorganize it is the first 15 or 20 pages of this document, this 60-page document, is going to be copy and pasted right into the body of the work group report. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I agree with what Paul is saying there. As long as we're extracting and, or I should say duplicating the important charts up to the top, and then they stay in their same relative location in the body of the, so it'll be somewhat more familiar to people when they get, if they bother to get to the body of the report, it'll have all its context and everything. But yeah, if I understood what Paul was saying, and if I think I understand what you're saying, I support trying to get, as you call it, the major bullet points, be they graphs, up front. I think that's because people are, unless they're real nerds, they're not going to get way down into the deep here.
Right.
So,
That's exactly what I am suggesting, is what the two of you said. I probably didn't articulate it clearly enough, but exactly that.
Just clarifying, just want to make sure we're on the same page, and it sounds like we are. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chuck. You're still on mute, buddy.
In the executive summary, which is kind of a introduction and a focus point, I think what's really relative is first really say somewhat to the extent what the charge is, size, capacity, and longevity, and give them an inclination what size, capacity, and longevity is in relative terms of a simple chart and explanation. Simply said, Coffin Butte, has 194 acres. Their current capacity is define what the airspace is, and then give them somewhat of an innocuous, I guess, longevity statement. So when they start to go down in the middle, they're framed up a little. You see what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir. All right.
And I just remember people learn different ways. Some people learn by reading, some people learn by a picture, and then of course all the engineers learn by data.
Right. Absolutely. You got to have data. All right. So let's go then to page 42. We'll do it a global reorganization for your consideration beforehand. But let's assume that this page, let's assume that the first 15 pages of the 60-page document are going to be in there, just reorganized, and that those first 15 pages get copy and pasted into the body of the work group report as is. And so there's duplicates. This chart's, for instance, going to appear twice. Because this will be, on page 5 or something of this, not page whatever the hell it is now, 42. It could be there also, but it'll be in the first 5 pages. We're gonna do the charge, who are the members, the findings and recommendation, the definitions, findings and recommendations, and then we're bouncing to 3 charts. 1 intake, 2 counties they come from, and 3 this. I don't know if that's the right second. I don't know if that's the right order or not, but those are the 3 key points. Go ahead, Daniel.
I just wanted to confirm, I'm not sure if in my impression, this chart is up there in that top 3, but maybe something like the baseline scenarios that the group has been talking about might be in that top 3. I don't know. That chart just seems like it might be in that category of less important than the. But maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I get the point. That chart that I was pointing to was at the top. The only reason I'm saying this is not because I think it's that important. I don't know. I'm saying that was the chart that we said was important during last week's meeting. And that's why I was asking Paul from the jump, are there other charts that are important? Because I thought there were. But this one seemed to be a chart people agreed on. So if that's not the case, I'm fine with that. I just want the 3 most important charts identified and put there. So Paul, and then Paul, Mark, Ginger, Chuck.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. It's not this chart because this is a backward-looking historical record chart. I think what the readers will need to see is the current scenario 1, scenario 2 projection for end of life from this point forward that Republic Services has contributed. That one, exactly. Thank you.
Okay, but that's not a chart. This is the explanation, right, of what you're just saying.
No, this is the critical data that projects the remaining landfill life. To me, this is absolutely key.
I'm not saying it's not key. I'm just focused on the word. It's not a bar graph or a chart. It is the key information that needs to be there, right? And here's another example where, I guess these are the definitions used in these 2 scenarios. So can we agree to this? The first 3 most important things. Well, Ken's saying we have a bar version of that data. That could be helpful too. I'm looking for graphics too, see, for the reasons Chuck articulated. But we need 3 things. The one we just looked at, the intake. Scenarios 1 and 2 that we just showed on the screen, and where the crap has come from. Are those the charts we need up front as the key messages? Just a simple yes or no. So I can make sure I'm tracking this. Paul, is that a yes or no from you? Yes. Okay, so Mark, Chuck, Ginger, hopefully focused on identifying what are the 3 key charts that form the key messages. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I would suggest that it would be great to have this chart as well as the one that's being talked about that Daniel and Paul were seeing. I think looking back and looking historically at what the projected remaining useful life of the landfill was provides something context, not just looking forward. So if we could have 4, then I would vote that this would be one of the ones that would be included.
Okay, Chuck.
I agree with everybody in the sense that a simple bar track reflects the landfill capacity, and the capacity with the data below doesn't stop at 2021, but in retrospect, we don't need it back to the creation of God. We only need it a relative distance back. What's more imperative is the forward distance of hope, I guess, to be somewhat facetious. In other words, the data down below goes out to 15 years. So it would be nice to say bar graph starts in the last 3 to 4 years and then goes out. That focuses the audience in longevity, if you will, what that longevity is. Because like Mark said last meeting, we want to make sure we define what the longevity is but the county commissioners need to know we are in a real physical world that may shorten that. But the get-go is just a simple table that starts at a few years back and goes out to what supports the data below in that two scenarios, if you will.
Okay, just to make sure I'm tracking, we have that. It's just not this chart that's on the screen. This is basically saying in the year 2021, we predicted the estimated capacity will be reached at the upper end in the year, I'm making this up, 2042, and at the low end, 2035. That's what this is saying. So it's one of the four charts is what I'm hearing can go in. What you're talking about is another chart, which I think we have as part of our top 3 or 4. Ginger.
Yeah, I personally don't understand this chart readily when I look at it. I agree that with the concept of providing a historical look back and how that's changed over time. I personally would like to see the bar chart that Ken is talking about. It may just be the way my brain works, but I find this chart confusing. And I don't know what this little orange line is over here off to the upper left side. And that may be one of the reasons I'm confused. Like we've got this little orange line shooting straight up over here in 1998. And then the rest of it is, yeah, that.
Yeah, what is that, guys?
Yeah, I think that represents data from annual reports from way back when, which were saying that the landfill was going to last to the year 2070 or 2075. I think that's that, that we have a long history of the annual reports, and I'm not sure why it's not connected to the rest of the graph. But my memory is reading and seeing documents that supported the projected life to go out to 2070, 2075. Whether it was actually in 1998, I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's what that is. It looks very odd, unconnected. I agree with you, Ginger.
Yeah.
It's sort of dangling out there.
Just briefly backing up what Mark said, I put this chart together based on the data that staff had from all the annual reports going back to 1998. It's floating there because there wasn't an annual report in 2000, or we just don't have one. It's unclear, but that's why they're not connected. So we don't actually have that. And the reason why there's an orange line and a blue line is just because sometime around 2009 is when they started giving date ranges as opposed to an estimate date. So instead of taking an average, we're adding both lines there. But yeah, that's the background, and whether or not this graph is useful is totally up to the group.
That explains a lot, Daniel. I really appreciate that. I think this data has value. I think all of us are in agreement on that. I do think we should talk as a subcommittee about the best way to present that visually, because I'm not sure that this chart does. And Daniel, that's not a knock on you. It's a reflection of the inconsistency of the data that we've been dealing with. Obviously the blue and the orange lines start occurring right around the time that Republic Services took over as the owner operator. And so that data is consistent going forward because that's how we have continually, estimated lifespan over time. When I first saw this, I thought that orange line over there on the left was somebody's had a whoops with their pen or something, although the non-connectivity only makes sense now. So I just wonder if we're all in agreement that we should use a historical look back, which I think is appropriate and right. I wonder if one or more of us on this subcommittee could play with the data and visualize it in different ways so we could come to an agreement on what is the best way to present that data to the work group and ultimately to the public, whether it's the bar chart that Kevin is referencing, which I don't have an immediate recollection of, or some other visualization. That would be my only suggestion here. Thanks.
Hey, Ken, do you have ready access to that? Oh, you're having he says he's having bandwidth issues here. Do we know what, can we show what that one is?
I'm pretty sure it's this one. It was Ken's sort of annual tonnage intake chart going out to the future, showing.
Yeah, I don't think this is it.
No,
that's the
can't be
query
it.
one. Okay, so it must be this one.
No.
Basically showing the difference between 1.1 millions and 1 million. Is that?
Mark, I think you're probably more familiar, just like visually readily with the data. I don't know that this chart is it either, because I don't see this looks like intake, not a projection of site of life. Am I
agree.
reading this correctly?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is it either. This is an intake, historic and alternative sort of futures. What would happen if it were 1 million or 1,000,001 tons? It's showing the projected longevity or useful life, not the historic. It's a combination, right? It's got historic intake with projected useful life based on 1 or 1.1 million tons.
Daniel, since you were the creator of the original of the chart that's got the orange and the blue on it, would you have the bandwidth or the ability to possibly try to render that in different visualizations so that we could pick one as a subcommittee?
Sure, and I think what we could do is just add the 2022 information to that as well. So that way we have the latest information that we're representing on
Sure.
the document, if that's helpful.
And then, does it make sense? I can go either way on this. So this is not the hill I'm going to die on or anything, but does it make sense if we have that one period and then we have the gap? Does it make sense to start at the point where the gap, like right after the gap, and then wordsmith that little orange line off to the side? Because I feel like no matter what we do visually, like that 1998-99 thing is going to kind of throw the whole look off. But like I said, not 100% wedded to that. I'm just wondering if there's a way to make this chart clean by starting with, roughly year, it looks like 2000 or 2001.
All right, Paul, then Chuck.
Yeah, Ginger, I appreciate your point about the visual discontinuity here being disturbing, but in fact, this fairly accurately represents the record that we've been exposed to, and this is what I was talking about in the meeting last week, where historically we've been led to believe that the expected EOL of Coffin Butte was sometime beyond our expected lifetimes, frankly. And so it really wasn't a huge worry. And so I think it's important that we preserve that information. If we want to write some verbiage here that explains why this little discontinuity exists, then maybe we should do that. Rather, I just don't want to see that eliminated because I think it's germane to the context here.
Yeah, I mean, my proposal was not necessarily to eliminate it completely from the record. I was just trying to make the chart cleaner and then figured we could explain it in words below. But if we want to do it both ways and put it in the chart and then say, hey, everybody, the reason there's this weird thing,
Yeah.
and it'll look different depending on what Daniel's able to come up with.
Well,
Daniel
pointed out there's a gap in the record here, and then there's another interesting kind of discontinuity, like you just pointed out, whereas starting in 2008 or 9, we started getting more full data here. We started getting more meaningful, X and Y, at least, and, maybe as much as type data. So I think some sort of text to explain that would would be necessary for the reader to understand what's going on.
Well,
so let me
I'll let Chuck and Marco, I will, I'll defer to the other members of the subcommittee on this. I think as long as we can explain what people are seeing, that's fine.
let me just summarize the action item, because all this is important, but we've got to get the big picture overall organization before we go into these very important edits. I'm just trying to triage the order. So the takeaway from this, as I understand it, subject to your confirmation, is that an updated version of this chart is going to be included in the first 4 charts that give people the punchline for the overall findings. The almost perpendicular 1819 is going to say in a somewhere, it's not going to be perfect, but for this next draft, it's going to say this represents the period of time of what the projections were in 18 and 98, 99. There is no data for 20 and 21 or whatever those things are saying. That explains the gap. Okay. And that as of 2009, we don't have the estimated capacity. Before 2009, we don't have that because it wasn't in the records. That's all we can do between now and tomorrow afternoon, is drop in something narratively that explains this. So Chuck and then Mark, and we've got to move on to what brought us here today.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just learned to read from left to right, if you will, and X and Y plane. What I'm wondering is what's the relevancy of going back so far in time where we could start out with 2008, where we have the dynamics of your capacity is reached and estimated your capacity is reached?
Well, let me give you the answer to that. And I'm sorry I'm being blunt here, that there are members of the community that correctly or accurately want to point out that we have been told since 1998 that this landfill had capacity up through and including the year, again, making it up 2079. And the reality has been that has been different throughout the course of time. So it's as simple as that. This is the data that supports the finding that that's the case. That's what it is. And so again, the pro and con of that and the nuance of that, we're going to deal with next week. We cannot continue on this chart unless someone has the silver bullet. Mark.
Well, maybe I have the silver bullet. I think just converting this into a bar chart and astericking the 2 years where the data is not there it won't look, it'll look much better if it's a bar chart. So I think it needs to be there. So because of the historic context, but I think, Daniel, we delegate to you the wonders of trying to revisualize this. But I think a bar chart with the pieces just being either footnoted or asterisked, we'll be able to say we just don't have the data there.
Okay, are we good to go on this then? We are. Okay. So now we have agreed that we're going to have these four charts up front. Okay. Then it seems to me the next big piece happens on about page 43 or 44 here. We don't, this stays in this, but it's not in the executive summary. All this stuff is not going to be in the executive summary. It'll be here because we don't, let's see. contribute site. Let's see, just. So now Ken unfortunately is having audio problems too. So you may not be hearing everything we are saying here. So we're going to have scenario 1 and 2. That's going to be part of the top. But really, we're now down to what is, keep going down. Where is, what page are we? Where is the beginning of what I called Ginger stuff? Because there was a agreement in principle that, okay, is it right? No, it's, God, this thing is so frustrating. The different things. Is this where you started in, Ginger? Yes, C, section C.
Hold on, I have like 17 screens open, so I'm trying to get back to the right one. Yes.
Okay.
44.
Okay, so then this is the stuff that was a main reason for today's meeting, is to see if we can get this section agreed to. So what is that? It is, scroll down a little bit. Okay, it's not these scenario 1s and 2s, because they will be moved up above, right? There will be the next scenario 1 down there is something we've already agreed is going to be part of the first four charts. Is that correct, Daniel?
We did agree it was going to be part of the first 4 charts, but I think what Mark and Paul were suggesting, and what I support as well, is that we have some way of referencing them lower in the document so people don't have to keep flipping back and forth. So, you know, if we've got scenario 1 and 2 up on like page 5, and now they're on page 42 or whatever, they're not going to have scenario 1 and 2 in front of them. So I think that was the problem we were all trying to solve for. Is that right, guys?
Wait a minute, it's very simple. We're having them in both places. Okay, we're having them in both places. But I am really trying I'm already assuming you've moved these things up to the executive summary. Okay, and they're going to stay here because that's the flow you have figured out. Now we go into the future scenarios. It's going to stay here in its flow, but this section of it is going to be copy and pasted up to the executive summary for section C here, which is the stuff that Ginger put forward to get dealt with. And that's where we're seeing if we can agree with Ginger's comments, which I thought we were darn close to agreeing to. All that stuff made sense. Until to stop here. So do we agree? Are there any prospective changes to pages 44 through 48?
Can we go back up to the table, please? This, that one, stop right there. Is it okay if I chat here for a second, Sam?
Please.
It's okay, take the floor.
Please.
So just a couple of thoughts here. One, I wasn't quite sure. I think there might be a typo. I'm not sure why pandemic is parenthetical under quarry excavation. I'm not sure why that.
Typo, Mark. In a previous iteration, I had noted that I needed to fix that graphic.
Yeah, okay, no problem. And then the only other thought I had as I was reading this, and I stumbled on it a couple of times, I was trying to envision how legislation, legal action, climate change, and activism would be neutral impacts to the site life scenarios. I was trying to envision how legislation would be how it could either be positive or negative. And I was trying to think about the same way in terms of legal action and climate change. Those all seem to me to be more negative than neutral. But so I don't know what other people's thoughts are, but that was a stumbling block that I had the couple times that I've gone back to this this table to look at it. So I open that for discussion.
Sam, can I jump in here? Because I can make this real quick, I think.
Go.
So at our last meeting, Mark, we had discussed, so this graph was created very early on as a way to try to bring compromise to this. Should we do scenarios? Should we not do scenarios? At our last meeting, we discussed as that sort of now almost being old and being a placeholder, so to speak, or that it changes format, because I think we could either get rid of it entirely or just recast it slightly, because I think what's more important now is the table that like poses the questions, because I think the goal with the table was that we were all trying to get to a point where we could delve into these topics more at a more granular level. And so I had looked at that first Coffin View green scenarios chart as like an initial offering toward compromise, but I think we've moved further beyond that. And so if the rest of the group is, you know, in agreement, I think we could just take that out. That was one idea I had.
I agree. I mean, we don't, and if it's going to stay in, it's going to be rewritten or redraft based upon the charts below that follow.
Well, you know, I understand the idea of trying to maybe simplify things. The one thing that, regardless of what columns things end up in, I think the one thing that is very useful here is it is a snapshot. And as such, I think it's more accessible to the reader than going to the new table that is all the list of questions. So I think it has some value. If there were a way to salvage it, I would support that. It doesn't take up that much space, but I think
Mark,
it is a
perhaps
snapshot.
we just remove the categories. We leave the factors in, but take the categories in.
That might be a possibility. Yeah.
And you can present them in alphabetical order, just like that's primarily how they're presented below as a way to do that. But all I'm saying, when I say take something out, it means for what we're getting out the door Friday at noon. Yes, we clearly need a graphic that does that, but this is not it. So it doesn't make sense to go in and argue where legislation could be until we go to these other charts and deal with it one time and then make the graphic representative of what we've agreed to. So let's go down to the bulk of this section, which is the table. These tables. Has anyone had time? Well, let me just ask Daniel. Has anyone have you received edits to any of these, background or questions?
I'm not sure. I haven't been able to dive into, I think all the emails that we received today basically haven't been addressed by me at all. So I'm not sure where we're at on this.
I think Chuck and Paul had a couple of questions that I saw come in.
Yeah, and I haven't had a chance to look at it.
And Ken did a chat a few minutes ago saying basically the same thing as I recall. Chuck, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I read these over and yeah, I like them because they are, the readability is better in this type of form, if you would agree. But the form up above, I also like with the verbiage below it, in the sense that it is an array, and these are both arrays where you can look at different information, if you will. Okay, I'm not mean to be confused, but I like the one up above too. If Ginger is kind enough to just revamp it way she wishes, or that works that, because the array lets you look at what if this happens and the consequences, that the correlations, if you will, as this has correlations. But I look at the above as array or evolving into a matrix along economical lines like this too. So I don't know if we were going to replace the graph up above, which negates some of the verbiage below in light of this. I'm not sure what your wishes are.
For now, we're taking out the graph above or not making a statement as to it does it have a positive, neutral, or negative impact on it. That will be, so for now, this discussion, let's just, we'll come back to that graphic. Has anyone else, so we know Mark has said he hasn't had time. Ken sent us a text that says, Paul, have you had time to look at this? You're on mute, buddy, sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me now? I'm having terrible internet bandwidth or latency problems as well. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I did look at this. I had a few suggestions. They're fairly small. They're things like let's rephrase tonnage cap and use the 2020 intake limit just to be consistent in the verbiage that Daniel and I talked about earlier. They're pretty small and targeted. Most of my comments had to do with the bulk of the text, that strip document that Ginger sent out earlier. And Daniel, you should have been copied on those.
Okay. So there's two issues in my mind. One is mechanically, how are we going to move from its current state to the fine-tune edit state? And that, so I guess the first question is, are we subject to the details and fine-tuning the verbiage? Are we okay with this general construct? We list a factor in the left-hand corner. We give it some background. We ask a question. Is that format viable for us to pursue? And so thumbs up or thumbs down or comment. So we have Chuck and Paul and Ian and Ginger and Daniel. So it's a question, I guess, and Mark says yes. Ken, are you okay with the general construct? I don't know if you have access. Okay, he's giving a thumbs up here. Chuck, do you have a question? Or are you agreeing with the general construct? He's agreeing with the general construct. Okay. So that being said, we'll come up next with the plan to, get these comments in and refine this stuff. Here is one of my major hopes for this subcommittee that relates to removal of the tonnage cap and quarry evacuation schedule. As all this is coming together and I'm thinking through the Planning Commission hearings and the Board of Commissioner hearings, I believe that these two issues could indeed play a pivotal role in the deliberations, be they for or against or neutral. I do not believe that the SMMP expert team is in a position unless they hire some new kind of expertise to answer the question, if the tonnage cap was removed, how many years could the landfill lift be shortened? Or given the existing watershed overall landfill capacity, at least the first part of that question. Because how do they know? I mean, they're not going to know that. We've got to give them a base condition, in other words. Let's assume, no, I guess maybe that is okay. If tonnage cap were removed, how many years could the landfill life be shortened? Isn't the better question, Ginger, at all, is if the tonnage cap were removed, by how would it impact the anticipated landfill life? I mean, it could be lengthened. It could be lengthened
Mhm.
because you only have 5 trucks a day that are allowed in there.
Yeah, so just to be clear to the entire group here, I put this together in the span of 3 hours yesterday. I tried to show the different kind of array of questions that could be asked based on what the factor is. That doesn't mean that these are the right questions or the ones that we will ultimately agree with, or that they are worded in the way that will ultimately get the subcommittee to consensus. So, I fully recognize that those questions, everybody will want to weigh in on those, and they may not be worded the right way. There may be too many in one section, there may be not enough in another. But what I was trying to get at is what do we as a subcommittee want to know about these factors and how that could potentially influence the scenario 1 and the scenario 2 projections. I think each of these factors are very nuanced. I think they are very, they're broad-based enough that they could have multiple outcomes. And I think that's one of the problems with trying to say, yes, positive, no, negative, site life up, site life down, is that's not necessarily the question for each and every one of these. Like when we're talking about legislation, the question isn't just how legislation could impact the landfill. The question is, what legislation is out there? What is potentially brewing? What's coming down the pike? What should we be prepared for? Same thing with alternatives to landfilling. What other viable options are there that we're not thinking about? What are the new and upcoming technologies that should be considered? And so as an SMMP consultant or advisor, provide us your expertise and give us some more details on these really critical things. That was sort of the approach I took to the question. So fully open to modifications of questions as needed.
Okay, so let's go to the second one. This I feel stronger about is the quarry. I think there's well, let me back up so I'm being as fully transparent as I can. During the legal subcommittee meeting this morning, which Mark was on, and he can provide his point of view, I asked the specific question, so is it in fact true that Benton County has said to Republic, if we grant you an expansion CUP, we're removing the cap? And the answer to that question is yes, that is the commitment. Then I asked, well, what if the Planning Commission said under their breath, well, why the hell did you do that at that point of time? And we don't like that for whatever policy reason, or the board, changes its mind or attention for whatever reason. Then are there other ways by conditions that the county could rectify the tonnage cap removal agreement, quote unquote, by putting in conditions, and I'm being absurd, like based upon the traffic study and the conditions of the roads, yeah, we don't have a tonnage cap, per se, but you only can bring 5 F-150 pickup trucks full of trash to the landfill on any given day. Yeah, there's no cap in the sense that 1.1 million or 1.1 million, but the intake has been restricted with other conditions. I believe that question is going to come up. And so, like you said, Ginger, this is going to be more nuanced, and I am encouraging the legal subcommittee and you guys to come together and give guidance to the planning commission and the board of commissioners on, is that not whether it's good, bad, or indifferent policy, but is that in fact legal to do? And then under what conditions is it legal to do? And then we'll have a better idea of intake that is dependent on other things other than simply a removal of the cap.
Yeah, I just put a comment in the chat because I'm very lost and confused sort of all of a sudden. So quarry excavation schedule.
We're not on that.
Okay, because we started on that and then it just seemed like we were combining the top two items and I'm sorry, I got lost.
Let me try to be clear. I apologize. Let me try to be clear. There are two topics that concern me. One is the tonnage cap and one is the quarry schedule. The reason they're concerning me is in this order, solely referring to the tonnage cap. I believe the planning commission and the board could likely say, we didn't like the fact in hindsight that we removed the tonnage cap before the actual CUP application was in place, but we did. Okay. Now, are there other ways vis-a-vis conditions that we could in place that will have the same effect as a tonnage cap by restricting the amount of traffic that goes in and out of that landfill? That issue needs to be addressed and thought about. And I think that is a joint legal and site life question.
So are we proposing that those become the questions that we ask about the tonnage cap?
Well, I am all I'm pointing out is I don't think anywhere in the overall report, which includes the legal stuff, at this moment in time, they have addressed, and you would have to look at this to frame up this question, the other possibility of reducing intake other than with a tonnage cap. And so this is a transparent heads up. It's a transparent heads up that that's going to happen. And they are going to issue such a memo. And so ultimately, when we ask this question, it's going to refer to more than just the removal of the tonnage cap. It could include anything that limits intake into the landfill. Any condition that limits intake into the landfill. It's as simple as that for you, for this. Now, let me pause there. Is that point clear? And I apologize, I'm going crazier than usual. Do you understand the issue I'm trying to tee up here? I need some reaction.
Like you're essentially saying that at some point when Republic Services files a new revised future CUP, that somebody at the Planning Commission or the Board of Commissioners is going to come back and say, because we can't limit the tonnage cap, or because there is no tonnage cap guarantee, we want to specify some other avenue by which we can limit the amount of tonnage that is coming into the landfill. And if I
Correct.
understand that, that's fine, but I don't understand where or how we're supposed to be addressing that in our document. And the other thing that I don't think is reflected in all of this is that Republic Services is already on record as saying that we understand that there's a lot of concern about the tonnage cap, and we are willing to continue to have a tonnage cap. So like, I don't understand what we're trying to accomplish with that issue in this document. I think that's where my disconnect is.
Okay, let me try to nail this one. This is important. Chuck, I see you. I am gonna call on you. So first of all, that last sentence you just said about the tonnage cap, I would bet my kingdom that there would be many, many people in Benton County that would say, wow, I'm hearing that for the first time, because we believe that Republic has been delighted with the fact that the tonnage cap is going to be removed in the next CUP. Correct, Paul, Mark, Ken? Are you hearing this for the first time, or is it only me? Paul?
So I agree. Ginger is correct. They have pointed out on their website, I don't know if it's been more formal than that they are willing to at least entertain the possibility of keeping the intake limit in place. And my perspective on that as a neighbor, as a citizen of Benton County, is that should be a renegotiation of the franchise agreement. So that's a legally binding stipulation. And if that's done, then I think that's off the table. It's as good as the cap that we have now.
All right. So,
I think the point I'm trying to make, Sam, is part of the reason we're doing this entire work group process and Republic Services is participating in it, is trying to recognize what issues are of great concern to the members of the community. And it has been pretty clear since the beginning, like dating back to September or October, that this tonnage cap issue, especially as it was slated to, be eliminated in the 2020 franchise agreement as part of a future expansion, has been a real point of consternation for everybody. And so part of what we're trying to do in this process is figure out if we can reach consensus on things like that. And that's why we have said, as Paul pointed out, in fact sheets that were submitted to the subcommittee back in September, and then also on the website, that we are willing to continue to move forward under, with a future CUP under a intake limit or a tonnage cap. So, that's why I'm certainly, like, if you look at Ken's note, I think the question is, again, if there wasn't one, what would that do to the landfill? Because we are proposing that we may very well have one, but if there isn't one, then what does that mean?
right.
Maybe we're going in circles here. I don't know.
We are. So let
quiet
me just try just to say two things. The very micro point as it relates to this question, or on the background, is it does not say that Republic Services is willing to renegotiate the existence of a tonnage cap. I'm not suggesting that it necessarily has to go there, but it would say it's bearing the lead on that is a possibility. I'm not denying you haven't said it on your website, that you haven't said it to this subcommittee, but I will bet you if you asked a poll of those that opposed the expansion, is the limit going to go away? Is it certain the limit is going to go away? They would say yes. And that's all I'm trying to do is make sure that message is clear. And then all we have to do here is make it clear that this isn't a fait accompli, that there will be no more tonnage cap. Paul.
So I agree, Sam. I think it would be a surprise to many of the community members to learn that is a negotiable point. Partly because many people, myself absolutely included, made a very big deal about the elimination of the cap if expansion was approved onto the expansion part as part of LU 21-047. So if we're going to speculate on that at all in our document, we do need to be very clear that that's a speculative point. And if we do that, then assuming that the volume number is still 1.1 million tons per year, then we already know what our projections are given that intake.
Right. Right. So all I'm asking is more clearly frame up this conversation, because we took the snippets of what we just talked about and put out a press release, there has to be a lot of people that would be applauding that news. And I don't think that is what they're doing now. Next point, the quarry. I also believe that a key factor in the discussions coming up before the Planning Commission and the BOC is more information about when this quarry is going to be at whatever state it's going to be in, and when. And this is the Knife River conversation and all of those, related issues. And I'm not asking Republic to play out its plans in the for purposes of getting the background row of quarry evacuation schedule nailed out. It's a broader comment. This is just the focal point. I think they're going to want the argument that I have heard it in its crudest form, which is not meant to be derogatory, is look at the whole reason Republic needs a CUP expansion is they created the problem themselves by getting too many customers that needed a place to put their trash. And they put in more than they didn't budget their intake. If they had budgeted their intake better, they wouldn't need this expansion and they would have met the out year goals versus the shorter out year goals. That is going to be a topic of discussion. And I would like to hear us do more about that in the body of your report. And this would require Republic to tell us more about the current status of the Knife River negotiations to give us a more likely scenario, which I'm not asking for on this call, because the SMMP dude or dudette is not going to be able to answer what is the likelihood the quarry is not fully excavated by the time it's filled without. That's not information they have because it's proprietary right now. And so I think I don't think we can kick this issue to the SMMP person. I think we need to have it before this goes before the Planning Commission. Ginger, then Chuck.
A couple of things. So first, I think the way that this was just teed up, the characterization that the reason we have a capacity issue is due to some sort of malfeasance or mismanagement of materials coming into the landfill is an extremely one-sided view of the issue and rather unfair. And so I'm going to push back on any language that tees the discussion up in that way. That said, we are really, really close to having some sort of agreement with Knife River. I am literally in conversations with people daily about where that is. It is my hope, if not expectation, that we will be able to share at least some details, that we will be far enough along in the negotiations to share some details at the next work group meeting. And as soon as those are wrapped up and we have a plan in place, we can absolutely add more detailed language about the quarry excavation and how that would impact site life and what the timetable is. I don't have that yet. I've said from the beginning that I will provide it as soon as I do have it. I am hopeful that we will have something that we can start sharing with this subcommittee and the work group next week. But I am not part of those negotiations, so I cannot make them go any faster than they are. So I think the issue that I was reading between the lines in terms of quarry excavation from comments that I had seen in the previous document from Mark and from Ken and from Paul was that there was a certain amount of confusion about how fast the quarry could be excavated and how we would be able to place waste in a lined cell based on that excavation schedule. So, for example, Mark asked, aren't we already excavating the quarry? The answer is yes. Knife River is currently excavating the quarry. Ian might be able to provide the exact tonnage. I don't know what it is, but in order to place waste in the quarry in a lined cell before we run out of space in cell 5, which is the cell we are currently in, we have to accelerate that excavation by a lot. I'd love to be able to say tenfold, fivefold. I don't know what it is because I don't know the numbers. Those are the kinds of details that I'm hoping to provide, at least in some respect, as early as next week. So yes, I mean, I think we always had an expectation that the quarry would be fully excavated, but I mean, that could have been 80 years from now, right? That could have been 50 years from now. I don't know what Knife River's timetable was for doing that. The reality is that if we are going to not have a gap, which is what Paul's been talking about at the very beginning, between when we finish placing waste in cell 5 and start putting waste in the quarry, we've got to move a lot of rock and we got to move it really fast. And so that is the position that we are in now. The issue with quarry excavation is not necessarily a long-term issue. It is an immediate and short-term issue. The capacity of the landfill, the permitted capacity of the landfill does not change with the quarry excavation. The permitted capacity of the landfill is what it is. It is set in stone based on the space available in the quarry. The problem is the space in the quarry is not usable space right now, which is what is creating the short-term problem as opposed to the long-term space issue. Ian, jump in if I mischaracterized any of that, or if any of that's confusing, just let me know. Thanks.
No, you did a great job stating that all, Ginger. I mean, the space in the quarry is part of the permitted footprint. And so it's just the short-term issue of moving rock out of there more quickly than what the quarry operator would do it naturally at. And I don't recall the exact tonnage they remove every year, but it's significant. The amount that has to be removed is significantly above what they would do in an average year.
So I think all that is very, very helpful information to get this discussion in the best place it could be by the end of the BCTT work group, meaning pre-CUP application finding. And I very much appreciate that update, because that's going to make a lot of the discussions we've had simpler that are still pending, simpler to wrap our brains around. Does any other subcommittee member have any questions for Ginger on that timing of the quarry issue or comments? Chuck?
Let's see if I understand everything correctly. It's not so much a question of tonnage or excavation. It's fundamentally a question of supply, demand, and equilibrium, if you will. In other words, if the supply and demand work with each other, the equilibrium is good. We've been talking about equilibrium for quite a few months now. But that being said, is the supply and demand and equilibrium is not an SMMP problem. It is a solid waste management problem. Solid waste, SMMP deals with materials. Solid waste management deals with demand, supply, and equilibrium. So what I'm saying is that in context, that this question is more relevant in an array up above in the context of solid waste management, if you will. And I think that's what Republic has been working in, solid waste management, not SMMP.
Okay. So can you guys see Ken's question at 452? Partial success is possible with the quarry. With the quarry is possible, perhaps even likely. Some rock is removed, but not all? Question mark.
Hey, Ken, if I understand your question, I think you're saying, is it possible that we will be somewhat successful, or that we will be able to bridge this gap if we get some of the quarry rock out, but not all of it in the next 3 years? Is that what you're asking, or am I okay, that's what you're asking. Ian, can you address that? Because I think you've got some more details about how we would position waste in, because obviously excavation would be continuing at the same time, correct?
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible. I mean, it would be possible to remove a portion of it. The challenge is that you have to start at the base grades, and then we line up against the side of Coffin Butte. So if you limit your downward excavation initially, it impacts everything going forward. So our goal is always going to be to get it fully excavated prior to starting at the bottom.
All right, any other questions on this quarry topic? Mark, anything from you?
No, thanks, Sam. Nothing to add at the moment. Appreciate it.
Okay. So let's we'll come back to the plan of how we're going to get this track changed and what have you. Can we scroll down to getting closer to page 60 where this thing ends here? So those sorry, stop right there. So where we right, page 52. So those pages, these questions are going to appear here. But again, these are the kinds of things I think need to go in, also in the executive summary in the body of the work group report. This is very similar to the SMMP work that they have said, here are these factors, here's the things we want to consider, here's the questions we want answered. What are the answers, expert? And then continue down, Daniel. And these are the appendices. So they're the appendices, and that's it. And so go down to the end, of that section, I think is page 60. These are all appendices, right? Okay. So do we agree in principle that the reordered version, which means executive summary in the order I proposed and your report, there will be duplicates, of course, of these 60 pages is the construct that we have enough consensus on moving forward with, subject to dotting the i's and crossing the t's, what have you. So what does this say? So we're missing everything after Ginger's table, which is not okay with me. So what is it that's missing, Ken or Daniel? Maybe you know and can tee this up.
Yeah, so this is missing everything that is kind of going into detail about essentially factors and scenarios and kind of more expanded narratives on what could happen in the future that would impact site life, where essentially yeah, the last thing in this is the table that Ginger submitted and doesn't go into that. For instance, the sections that Ken had made up with the graphs detailing kind of with more detailed narratives about possible scenarios moving forward. That's all not included in this version of it.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I gotta open up the chat thing here. Ken's stuff is just flashing and then I'm missing it. We talked about scenarios for language. All right, well, let's talk about this now. I agree that there wasn't an agreement at the end of our last meeting that, but what are you scrolling for, Daniel?
Oh, I was just scrolling to the end of Ginger's table because that's where we left off.
Right. So what Ken is saying is he is not okay with ending this report on page whatever it is right there. Obviously appendices are in, they're appendices, and that he wants in, and maybe we have to go to the end of this, the portion of this document, Daniel, so that Ken can say page X to Y is what I want to have in, and then we can frame up the conversation. That should be like, wait, yeah.
I'm guessing it would start at kind of the Ken's version of the factors and how they would impact the baseline at 154, and moving down from there, I think is essentially all of Ken's submitted work.
Well, okay, this part, I thought the construct we did agree to is what we have above in that background and question piece is in lieu of this verbiage in your version and Ken's version. That was all I came away with, correctly or incorrectly, the understanding from our last meeting that we would substitute what we have now in this draft for Ken's version and Daniel's version that goes back and forth, the arrows up, down, green, yellow, red, all of that stuff. Was that your understanding, Ken, or not? I'm not talking about the graphs. I'm talking about, let's see, that said, let's see, we talked about important.
He said, yes, it was, to your question, that was it his understanding.
That was, okay, so we're good there. So that all goes away. So let's get to the part so I can see clearly and you can see clearly the specific sections that Ken is suggesting still need to be there.
Is this the section that you're thinking, Ken? The what if scenarios about landfill operating life? Ken says yes.
Okay, so how many, let's just scroll through that to give us kind of a refresher. Including that, what you just had, the thing about legislation and all that, I thought, keep going down. You had a bunch of narratives. I understand the graphs, but like, have we dealt with all this stuff that you're going up and down with right now?
So we got to, I'm thinking it probably would go through the conclusion, Ken's section. These findings are already dealt with, so you can ignore those. And then I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, but the above section you had requested to replace this section that we're getting to now. So I don't think you're asking to include the sort of older version of what we had just gone through.
I'm actually going to try this voice thing because I haven't got a blurb message in a while. So yes, so the conclusion you're talking about, what you're looking at right now is an earlier version that you have been looking at. Some of the things in that, what we just scrolled through, are items which I'm looking at, but I have a feeling I'm not going to read because I don't think they're going to pass kind of the where we are. I don't think they're as relevant as they used to be. I think the ones that I want to focus on are the ones that are more to the landfill closing kind of earlier than expressed. So I want to follow up on what Brian May talked about last time. And I'm starting to get error messages here, so I'm back to chat.
Can you chat as to, do you have a specific page or figure or chart, graphic that are your current focus?
And then we also have the human factors section 4 that Ken had submitted as well, that isn't present in the sort of shortened simplified version. And I wanted to know if that was also included in what Ken was hoping to have in there.
So which are the scenarios that you think are valuable, Ken? Yeah, poor guy. It's always such a pain in the butt when the internet is not cooperating.
I'm going to scroll back up to that section that Ken said he's going to be wanting to keep but revise, focusing on some scenarios just so we can reference those, because it sounds like he mentioned no to the question of if he wanted to keep the human factors section, but correct me if I'm wrong on that, Ken. But I'll go up to this questions to be asked up here. Oh. On a quick file size note, if we do end up consolidating the document substantially, we might be able to start emailing each other again with the full file. Unfortunately, today it was about 40 megs, so it wasn't emailable. But it's possible in the consolidated version, we'd be able to start emailing.
Okay, so let me try to drive again. So my understanding is that what was labeled section 4, human factors, is going to be taken away. Is that correct, Ken? To the extent you can even hear me. You thought you heard that message from him, Daniel?
Well, he happened to respond, no, there are a number of scenarios I think are valuable when I asked that question, but he could have been answering your question prior. So I'm just not sure. I don't want to assume.
So we need to get clarification from Kent. Okay, salvage relevant parts of 4. Okay, so that helps with that, just understanding. Let's get back to the charts and just pick an example, the first one of a chart that Ken is putting forward. Republic. You can, the question I'm teeing up for you is, what is your current position on these kinds of charts in general, meaning going beyond where we said we'd stop before? And the inclusion of these charts, because last time I understood you said your position was you don't approve of them, but you'd be willing to listen, subject to this new section C that we now have on the table. So correct me and or update me as to your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the challenge is that Ken has a multitude of changes that he was going to make in our ongoing effort to kind of come to the middle on this. And so, he had been pretty gracious in accepting some of my changes. And so what we're looking at, I don't think is necessarily reflective of what he's going to be putting forth as the new version. So I don't want to say, no, I'm not going to consider it because I haven't seen it. Like, I want to sort of see where he's going in terms of what he's going to, as he says, salvage relevant parts out of section 4. So I'd like to see, I'm certainly open to whatever he's proposing, but I can't comment on what I haven't seen. So.
What? You're not that good? You can't predict?
Some days I have superpowers, and some days I am just a very tired person. And this is one of those.
I think we can.
Believe it or not, this is not the only project I'm working on. So it's been a little bit crazy today.
All right. So given those realities, hasn't had the bandwidth, excuse the pun, to do this. Mark hasn't, and Ginger obviously hasn't seen it. We got to move to the next phase of this afternoon's seance, which is, what are we going to do timeline wise to move this forward? And so just trying to figure out, I guess the first step seems to me would be Ken, then Mark, and Paul and Chuck, if you're so inclined, and then Ginger gets a look at it, and then we would have to reconvene to hash out those changes. And all that stuff is not going to happen between whatever time it is now and tomorrow at the same time. It's not going to happen in the next 24 hours. So what is your suggestion as to what we do for purposes of getting something in 48 hours versus 24 hours? Because we haven't even gone to the findings and recommendations. And that was one of Paul's and Ginger's back and forth yesterday, I think. So what's the plan, Stan? Get off the bus, Gus. Don't need to discuss much. I'm gonna set myself free. Chuck, then Paul.
Simon and Garfunkel, that was good.
Thank you. That's all I had. I went with it.
Yes, okay. It would be nice to, if we can, I realize not everything's set in stone, or if it was, I'd be overboard by now. If we could just kind of crunch something down where we think is where we're at, and then still have a chance to discuss it further, that would be great.
Paul, you're up next, and then Daniel.
So in terms of prioritizing what we need to deliver for this draft 4, I have a question for you, Sam, and that is draft 4 going to serve as the document that the work group references, in which they start polling, they start voting on recommendations and findings? Is that what the polling means?
So the nomenclature has changed slightly, but the best answer, the most direct answer to your question is no. It is not the version they are going to be quote unquote polling on. The draft 4's primary purpose has been to tee up the findings and recommendations input at a week from tomorrow's work group meeting. The changes that will be made based on work group input would then go out as either draft 5, but maybe that's an overstatement of what it will be. It may be 4A or draft 4B, because we're only going to be able to get in what people say on Thursday night at the work group meeting, and send that out for the open house and public, and teeing up the member polling.
Okay,
So
I still think that we should probably change our focus here away from exploring scenarios in detail, which is valuable and needs to get into the report, and it's information that I certainly endorse being in there. But it sounds like at this point, people are going to start to gel. Work group members and the public are going to start to gel their impressions of findings and recs. Findings and recs are far from presentable at this point, in my estimation. So I would respectfully suggest that we change focus. The stuff on human factors and all that, etc., and the table can kind of proceed in the background, but I think we ought to try to get our findings and recs act together here, honestly.
I couldn't agree more. Daniel.
Thanks. So I guess I wanted to start with just the functional piece of, right now we have this simplified version that we sent out. For the most part, is based on Paul and Ginger's kind of feedback, going through the document that we've been working from and simplifying that. But it's also in large part based on deleting a huge amount of the scenarios section that we just talked about with Ken. And I wanted to ask the group if that simplified version, that sort of track change free, is the place that we can start with for moving this forward. And specifically, is that a version that folks feel comfortable with, or does that need to change for us to have the new kind of baseline to move this document forward? I just want to be on the same page and see if that simplified version can work, understanding that you receive this with very little time ahead of the meeting. So I guess from a broad stroke, from what you saw from Paul, from what you saw from Ginger, and then based on our conversation earlier about what's missing from Ken's submitted content, is that an acceptable place to start? Or do we have to go back to the drawing board with the document to start from?
Let me just say it has to be the acceptable place. First of all, we don't have any other time. And second of all, I think there's an agreement in principle that that is the document. It's rearranging it as I suggested. Okay. It's taking the so-called simplified document, rearranging it in the order I suggested, so we can cut and paste it, the first X number of pages, right into the body of the work group report. And it will have to include the Ken, for lack of a better term, shorthand, Ken scenarios that we play out there, with a note that I guess the decision point there is, are they Ken scenarios as they exist now, or is Ken going to have time between now and noon tomorrow to do the new and improved Ken version of that stuff that we didn't get to? So there's three choices for the end of the document, right? Nothing. What we have now for Ken's, that was Ken's previously submitted stuff of the last several weeks, or the new and improved Ken version, if he can get it out between now and noonish tomorrow. Those are our three options for the other pages.
So we got a note from Ken that he agrees we can work from the simplified version. So I'm still not clear on if Ken is hoping to submit the new content before tomorrow for inclusion in draft 4, but Ken is on board with the simplified version.
Yeah, I see that. So let's see if Ken can hear us and ask, his reasonable ETA on getting the new and improved Ken.
He says, yes,
By noon tomorrow.
I can get the new content in rough form resubmitted. It will be basic, he says.
Okay, by noon tomorrow. Good.
By noon
All
tomorrow.
right. So that settles that. So then what goes into so-called draft 4 is what we just said, reordered. And I will work with you on that, Daniel, later tonight or tomorrow morning, to make sure, it flows, because my imagery is that some sections of it, the top sections, now that's been reordered, get plugged and played into the body of the overall work group report.
So,
all right. Good,
I would
Mark.
I would just like to jump in and support what Paul said with regard to, and I don't know how we get this done, but the findings and recommendations really have to move up on our priority list, because I do think that will be an area that people will go, particularly if the other sections have most or all of their findings and recommendations. They're going to be looking for that out of this group. So I have not had a chance to look at the stuff that's been floating around from Ginger and Paul, but I don't know how we get that done, but that is critical in my view.
So let me just ask a factual question to make sure, at least that I'm tracking. The findings and recommendations are on pages 2 to 11 of the simplified draft. Daniel, those are all of the findings and recommendations that have been taken from other sections of the report, because they were scattered throughout the document. You mush them all together and organize them in one place, with the exception of the stuff that came in today. Is that accurate statement of where that is?
Correct. To the best of my ability, everything that has been submitted is included, but it's very possible that something slipped through the cracks. So I just ask everyone to review it. And just briefly, can I note, when I reorganized the sections, I sort of found commonalities and made headings to basically show this is the topic, the sort of narrow topic that these recommendations are focused on. And then you'll see letters beneath it saying A, B, C. Generally, my take on it is that these cover the same thing in some way at least, and they should be looked at to be consolidated. That might not be the case entirely. Maybe some of the things that are in the A, B, and C should be considered individually. And if that's the case, we should talk about that. But that was my approach. Everything that does not have an A, B, C next to it, I interpret it as a kind of a standalone finding that isn't related to another one.
Okay. So just mechanically thinking out loud. I think there was some comment that I read about it. Are these in the right order? I think we just have to, for a moment of time, stabilize this document and say, let's assume they are in the right order. If we can get to that later tomorrow, we will. But we need a very streamlined process where, and maybe this is easier, that you be Daniel, that you take pages 2 to 11 as a separate document, so it's easy to email over, and simply say, is it fair to say, is it possible that Paul, Chuck, Ken, and Mark can submit one set of agreed upon track changes to Ginger and Ian by X o'clock, such that they have to Y o'clock to add their edits, and we put them in the report with the then existing track changes. We don't try to reconcile them between the community members' perspectives and the Republic's perspective. We just tee them up as we've done in the past. Here are their current state. Here are suggested track changes from both sides and comments. And that's all we're going to be able to do between now and tomorrow. Or is that, because what happens is, I guess the alternative is you each do them individually, and then you have to then, Daniel, mush them all together with compare doc or by hand to get to that state where everyone's comments are seen.
Yeah, just briefly on the mechanics of that, this goes for the rest of the document. It's been extremely challenging to be in that position, especially when a lot of the recommendations delete other people's recommendations. It's an impossible place for me to be in, and I cannot do it. It just does not work, and it will not result in a product that everyone will feel comfortable with. So I strongly recommend that we go with Sam's original recommendation as for essentially a subcommittee of folks just to get together, hash it out, and send it over to Republic folks to provide their comments on, so that it's more streamlined and we don't have to make any judgment calls about whose word gets in last.
Reaction?
Oh, that's fine with me. I love subcommittee meetings because, we do them all the time on the land use side. We have so many subcommittee meetings. I mean, let's start at midnight tonight. I'm being facetious, but yes, I think that's probably, if there's a way to get us together to do it. That seems like I agree with Daniel. I cannot imagine how you would try to mush together 4 people's comments and then add 2 more people's in. Now, having said that, I have to beg off. I've got a work meeting at 5:30. So I'm gonna go do that. And then the new subcommittee is supposed to meet at 5:45. I already sent them a note and said, I'll be there between 5:45. All right, it's good to see you.
Mark, one quick question. Do you meet at Subway for the subcommittee meeting?
You're a funny guy. All right.
Yeah, a job. Bye.
Bye.
So I'm sorry, but I don't see how this is a reasonable ask of you. And not I'm not, this is a criticism of what Daniel just said. I fully support it. But we're asking too much of you. I don't see how we can say to Ken, you don't sleep until tomorrow night at 5 p.m. You get to go to sleep. You got to do all this other work, and then you got to edit these things. And then, you guys got to meet in the meantime, reconcile all that, get it to Ginger, reconcile. I'm sorry. I don't see how we do this. What am I missing? Is this even realistic?
Ginger's an hour ahead of us, so she's already in the
In the
finishing it.
future.
Yeah.
She's in the future, right?
Yeah, yeah. So she's already finished it.
So Ken just wrote, agree to the process, not the timeline. That's supportive of what I just said. I don't see how this timeline works in the real world because frankly, Daniel, don't forget, we have all the other sections of the report to put together and get out tomorrow to me so I can do the final mushing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I generally, I think we might just have to be like, accept the state that it's in now, and just try to frame it as best we can. But I totally agree. I can't imagine this working out. But I think the process wise, I think for the next rendition of this, that's what we should consider to clean it up. But yeah, I don't imagine this being sorted out by noon tomorrow. I mean, that's going to be near impossible ask.
Because this is the only subcommittee that I'm with in the moment, obviously. I will have another one at 5:30, 2 minutes. I'm thinking out loud only. What would be your individual thoughts if I was to recommend to the Board of Commissioners on Tuesday that we need a 2-week timeout to stabilize these drafts and catch up? And I'm even thinking out loud only, I'm even questioning whether or not we should have Thursday's work group meeting because of the state we're going to be in. It just feels to me in the moment too much like last time, like draft 3, that there's so many hanging chads, loose ends, what have you. And that probably is going to get me fired, to which I'm not saying no to. But what is your in the moment reactions to that off the cuff? It's not off the cuff. I've thought about it for a bit, but reactions. Paul, Chuck, Ken, Ginger, any order you want. Paul?
Well, I guess I'd have to say whatever is to achieve it. I think I've been clear. I feel strongly cut of the, we need to have carefully considered finding and recs documented. And to do that is going to take multiple iterations. I mean, you saw what happened with chapter 3. It's still ongoing. Findings and recs will be a little more definitive, but I think they'll be more contentious, frankly, some of them. And I think we owe all the parties concerned at the table an opportunity to voice those, to debate them, and to drill down and find out what we can achieve consensus on and what we can't. And those need to be carefully considered before this draft goes to the work group. That's my sense.
Chuck?
It was refreshing, to be truthful with you, to see Ginger's stripped down transmissions today. Just from the standpoint, it was nice to see everything in black text. Okay, that kind of give revelation to we're moving in the right direction, albeit there still needs to be continuity between everybody since you're already past your meeting, so I'll sign off.
Ginger is here for you, and I think Ken had a thumbs up, but I'll give him a chance. Ginger, reaction? Well, it's just not a final and binding. I'm floating it. Because I'll need to talk to Darren and oh darn, I'm flashing on his name, the county administrator. I'll have to talk to two of them tomorrow. Ginger, what's your general pulse taking in the moment? She can unmute. Yeah,
Okay, so I will be fully transparent that I had kids and dogs screaming while we were talking about this. Are we asking for a delay in submitting the fourth version of the draft? Is that what I'm understanding?
yes. Now, how that impacts the final version, which right now I think was due on March 24th. I literally haven't had a moment to think about that, but it's trying to, you know, my first effort would be try to rearrange the time between now and March 24th to stay on schedule. Is there a possibility that that schedule would have to also skip a week or two, you know, that whatever the time of our pause is? Yeah, maybe, but I haven't got to that point yet.
Yeah, I mean, speaking on behalf of the company, we thought we were going to be wrapped up with this in December. I cannot stand here in good conscience and tell you that we would be supportive of any extension of the overall process that pushes past the March deadline. If we need to make adjustments to the timetable, to, you know, as far as the dates on when version 4 and when version 5 come out, you know, and mush them together, that's fine, but we cannot go past March. You know, the reality of the situation is that we first filed this CUP back in May of 2021. Okay, we are coming up on a 2-year anniversary of when we first said we needed this expansion. And if we get the report, the final report to the subcommittee or to the Board of Commissioners at the end of March, we're realistically looking at least another month before they're going to have time to review it and come back with questions, and all of those things are going to happen. And we have already committed that we would not file any new CUP while this process is going on. And we just are not at the point where we can delay the overall process further. I agree with Paul that the findings and recommendations are critical. I'm a little confused because when Paul sent out his findings and recommendations and they were grouped together, I thought we have a lot of alignment on them, quite frankly. I didn't think that we were so far apart that would necessitate, you know, a major delay. I understand that they might not be perfect or, you know, refined in time for workbook 4, but I thought we generally had consensus on many of them. And maybe I just completely misread that. But when I looked at what Paul submitted, there wasn't anything that leapt out at me that, you know, said, oh my gosh, we have to have a grudge match over this. Where there are items that, yeah, we might need to work on this one, or I'm not sure I can support that one. Yes, but, you know, overall as a document, I didn't think we were that far away on it.
Well, that's the good news. All right. Well, I think that's all we can do in the moment. And so if you guys want to stay on and talk, you can. I got to hop to my next subcommittee meeting. Thank you for your hard work, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And I don't think we can stay on very long because the other subcommittee is going to kick us off of Zoom pretty shortly. I'll send out ask about future meetings for us to wrap up our work. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Ken.